Welcome to CFO 4.0, the future of finance. The CFO role is changing rapidly, moving from cost controller to strategic visionary. And with every change comes opportunity. We are here to help you take advantage of this transition, to win at work, drive your career forwards, and lead with confidence. Join Hannah Munro, Managing Director of ITAS, a financial transformation consultancy, as she interviews key experts to give you real-world advice and guidance on how to transform your processes, people, and data. Welcome to CFO 4.0, the future of finance.
So hello everybody and welcome to CFO 4.0. I'm very excited to say that today I have with me David Wood, who is the chair of London Futurists. So welcome David, really lovely to have you on the show today.
It's my pleasure to be here.
So obviously today we're going to talk, I guess, about what the future holds with us. There's a huge amount of change coming at the moment, particularly around AI. So it'd be great to, I guess, get your perspective over what you've seen in the last 12 months. What's some of the shifts that you've seen in that landscape and what does that mean for how things are changing?
Well, the pace of change of AI is increasing. Some people say, well, it's hit a wall, it's been overhyped, but I disagree. Some people say, look, companies are struggling to make use of AI, and that's true, but usually it's because they're not going about it in the smartest way. It's same as with many other disruptions. Great companies stumble because it requires things to be done differently from before. Companies go through this, sometimes called a J curve. It refers to the fact that you're doing quite well to start off with, but there's the downward period where you're not quite adapted to the new possibilities of the latest AI tools, and you get confused when you apply them. And then if you're not careful, you'll give up on that process altogether, and you'll miss out on the upper curve of the J, which can come later on.
So what do you think is the challenge with the adoption of AI? Why isn't it widespread given the developments we've seen over the last few months?
Well, people are naturally disturbed when they discover that the AI is hallucinating, that it isn't entirely trustworthy. It makes up references. I've had this in my own research. I've put in my own articles into AI and it's given me very useful feedback. But occasionally it has suggested I add in references and I think, wow, this sounds like a fascinating reference. But when I've gone looking for it, it doesn't exist. But even when I tell the AI, don't produce references that don't exist. So it does require some human supervision, which is a bit like how you deal with a bright young employee or an intern. You don't hand over the keys to running the whole company to your bright young employee or your interns, but they can do a lot so long as, what's the motto? Hands off, but eyes open. You need to check what's produced. And putting these processes in place to do the checking can take a while. People need to figure out not just how to use general AIs, but if there are some AIs that are more suited to the particular work practice. So some of the smartest firms, I'm referring here to some legal firms who have used AI very productively, what they have done is they have specially trained AIs, not just on the general knowledge on the internet, not just on the contents of Reddit forums and so on, which is how the standard large language models operate, but they've trained them on material that's especially important for their own work. So in the case of legal firms, it's the most important court cases, their prior judgments and legal theory and so on. There are other specialist systems in areas such as science. So there are chemists who use large language models that are trained on chemical formula and all the ins and outs of chemistry instead. So you've got to pick and choose which system you use. And even more important than picking the system is picking the groups of people who you can rely on to support you adequately there. And there are a lot of people who portray themselves as AI experts, and they may well be experts in some aspects of AI, but they don't actually have the deep knowledge or even up-to-date knowledge in a particular field. And if you get burned by such a consultant, you as a company may take the wrong decision that there's nothing in this AI after all. So the most important skill isn't do you understand AI? It's how can you find the reliable partners and consultants to help you?
And you mentioned people may specialize in a particular aspect of AI. What are the aspects of AI that we need to know exist? You mentioned obviously LLMs. Are there other types of AI that we need to be aware of?
Well, there's a whole zoo of different AI possibilities, as people have spoken about. And even more interesting is when you have combinations of different treatments, different approaches. And many of the more recent AI models, they're sometimes called large language models, but they have a lot of other stuff in them as well. That's sometimes called old-fashioned AI or good old-fashioned AI. There's even an acronym, GOFAI, which means what people were trying to do in the 1970s and 1980s and indeed 1990s, which is to embody expert principles in a whole bunch of if-then rules or other logical reasoning. That type of AI never quite lived up to promise because it's very hard to scale these systems. You always find counterexamples which seem to refute the process. But it turns out if you combine the large language models, which are a bit like intuition, it's just somehow the AIs are aware of patterns, they spot patterns that humans don't spot, with the rational monitoring side. So sometimes the combination is called neuro-symbolic, neuro for the large language models and symbolic for the logical or symbolic reasoning. And when you combine them both together, you get, like what happens in good human brains, you have that combination of intuition and creativity throwing up all kinds of fascinating ideas, and the critical brain which comes along and says, well, this was fun, but frankly, this is never going to work. This is cute, but it's not going to work either. But this other idea here, we need to apply more reasoning to it. So it's the combination of neurosymbolic which is likely to be truly successful.
And when you look back over the past 6 to 12 months at what's happening in the AR world, what excited you the most? What do you think has sort of given more, or is going to bring more opportunity within that space?
Well, let me mention two things. First of all, there's the growth in video generation capabilities. It's not just that software can now generate text or images. It can make a pretty good job of generating videos. So that can be cost saving. You don't actually have to film real world models. Now, they're not quite perfect yet, but the trajectory is very compelling. And by the way, so let me just slip in one other thing here, is that AIs can now make a good job of producing, dare I say it, podcasts. What they've got, this is Google's Notebook LM. You can feed a whole book into this, and in just a matter of minutes, it generates artificial conversation, but with lots of ums and ers, and the two different participants in this discussion is usually a man and a woman. They intercut each other's, like often happens in some podcasts, and they're pretty good in their summary. They're not perfect yet. I fed the whole content of one of my books in, and it made a good job of picking out some points, but it misunderstood one or two others as well. So it wasn't entirely faithful. On the other hand, humans who have been reading my books, glancing through, have been known to misunderstand bits as well. So maybe I shouldn't be too harsh on the AI for that. So there's more generation capabilities. But the other thing is that the AIs need less prompting than before. About 2 years ago, everybody said, hey, there's a new profession in town. It's prompt engineering. The people who know how to get the best out of AI by specially knowing the syntax, say this, then say this, then say this, then say this. It turns out that AIs often auto-prompt themselves now. They look at what you've said. They know a bit about your background because they're familiar with the kinds of things you've asked about in the past, if you've turned that feature on. So it knows the difference between you and a general query. And then it generates by itself the right kind of prompt to stimulate the other parts of the AI to come up with something really impressive. So the career of prompt engineering is not a long-lasting one. Don't tell your nephews and nieces to study prompt engineering at university. By the time they finish, it will no longer be needed at all.
And what about AI agents? There's been a lot of discussion around that as a concept on social media. Tell us a little bit about that development.
So there is a bit of hype here. People have latched on to some new terminology. It turns out that we've had AI agents for a long time. If you've ever spoken a few years ago to your Amazon Alexa at home and said, turn on the lights or play music, it's doing things in the real world. It's turning on your lights or playing music or tuning to a different radio station. So there has already been AI that connects to the real world. Some people have made a great deal of money by automated trading algorithms. And these systems have got the ability to buy and sell shares on behalf of humans, on behalf of institutions. So we've already had agents. But actually, there is something different here, which is the combination. Here it is again. The most interesting things come from combinations. Here, the combination is between the latest and greatest AI models, the large language models, and this agential capability. And just as these new AIs are much more intelligent than the old ones, it gives you a better conversation nowadays than Alexa did a few years ago. Therefore, the new AI agents are potentially much more powerful. And you can ask them, if you dare, to book you a holiday. So I'm not sure I would quite trust it to do all that yet, but it might come up with a recommendation, say, would you like to go to Antarctica for sunbathing? I'd say, no, that's not quite what I have in mind. But it might come up with a recommendation based on what it knows about me. And then all it would need from me is a sign off. And then it would go ahead and do the booking on my behalf. So they are coming, these AI agents.
I guess, in with your official title of Chair of London Futurists, what does the short or near term future hold within the AI world? If I give you the 12 months ahead, what do you think that looks like?
There's a lot of discussion on this topic. Some people feel that within 12 months, it's possible we will have artificial general intelligence, which is a term that's often abbreviated as AGI, which means that the AI will have as much general knowledge as we humans. And typically, AIs have only got narrow knowledge today. They're quite broad, they understand lots of subjects, but you can eventually find out, gosh, this AI's got no common sense. It's asking me something really stupid here. And even a human with 100 IQ will never ask something quite so foolish as this. So it lacks full general reasoning capabilities. And it's the holy grail of AI, since Alan Turing spoke about it in the early 1950s. There's other people who wrote about it in, I think, the 1870s. Samuel Butler's book, Darwin Among the Machines. If I've got the title right, he envisages that there would be AIs with as much capability as humans in all of the cognitive tasks. So when might this come? And until recently, most people thought it's several decades away, maybe 50 years away. But as a result of the changes in the last few years, most people have reduced their timelines. And they have now said it's not going to be 20 or 50 years ahead, it might be 5 or 10 years. Well, in the last year or so, more people are sticking their heads above the parapets and saying it might just be 12 or 24 months. And how on earth is this possible? It's because you use AIs to improve AIs. It's no longer dependent just on humans coming up with the new ideas. Just as AIs can suggest holidays or can suggest music to listen to or can suggest pictures or text, then they can actually suggest changes in their own architecture. Now, they're not in control yet, but they are coming up with lots of suggestions which the humans in the AI companies are adapting and approving, which is why you might have faster progress. Some researchers talk about there being a whole factory full of geniuses. That's what you get if you have the most powerful AIs and give it enough computational bandwidth. It's like having a huge factory of, somebody said, 10,000 human geniuses might be represented by this. So when you've got something approaching that, you can get a lot faster progress. And what does that mean? Well, it's going to change absolutely everything.
And let's talk about that then. So that artificial general intelligence, what does What does that mean for the world that we live and work in right now?
So today, people are generally quite positive about the impact of AI on jobs. They say AI is helping me to do my job more quickly and more productively. It's helping me to focus on the really most interesting parts of my job, the stuff that isn't routine, the stuff that's truly creative. It involves collaboration, it involves common sense. But it turns out that maybe the AIs will be better than humans in all these aspects as well. There are already AIs that display better emotional intelligence than most humans. The really interesting thing about some of the AIs that have been offering medical advice is not just that they have a remarkable knowledge of medical treatments. The way they express it is often judged by independent observers as being in a more friendly, compassionate tone than the human medical experts who've been the kind of comparison there. And it's because humans get tired, humans get grumpy, humans are sometimes very friendly and sincere, but they sometimes are in a hurry and they cut corners, whereas these AIs have got just the right amount of patience. So they're already demonstrating more compassion. They're already demonstrating a lot of creativity. And it's like human creatives, you can't trust them entirely, but they are coming up with fascinating images now, fascinating videos, fascinating slogans. So most of what people thought would be the safe part of their jobs, suddenly it's gone. And what does this mean? It means many people are shocked. Many people are angry. Many people are feeling unexpectedly left behind. They thought the AIs are coming for other people's jobs, but not for them. But maybe that's not going to be the case much longer. So more people are going to find themselves unexpectedly out of work. And the skills that they had been relying on to keep them wealthy for the foreseeable future are no longer economically valuable.
And that's a really, given the time frames that we're talking about. So is that I guess that is that capability dependent on the development of this the artificial general intelligence? Is that the key to that shift actually happening?
Yes, I should be a little bit more careful in one thing I may have suggested. I'm suggesting that there's a sudden discontinuity between today's AIs and this artificial general intelligence of the future. Well, it is a gradual ramp up. Each time AI gets more capable, it's able to displace more aspects of more people's jobs. But the impact on jobs will depend on how fast this progress comes. And it's not necessarily going to be 1 year, but I would say somewhere between probably 3 years and 10 years, there's quite a high likelihood that almost all the jobs that people do will no longer be open to them. There might be a few people who can still have jobs managing the AIs at the highest level, but that won't be for most of us. Now, there is another impediment too, which is that to actually have interaction in the real world, it's not just a matter of pressing buttons on a web page. Sometimes you need to have actual robots going in and manipulating things. And for a long time, people said, well, this is the slow part because robots aren't very good with their hands. There used to be a joke. How do you escape from a Terminator robot? Answer, you run upstairs. Why? Because if you watch videos of real world robots trying to go upstairs, they always fall down. Ha ha ha. It turns out that now robots are much better at climbing upstairs. If you look at the videos released by many Chinese companies, they seem to be the world leaders in this. They are amazingly flexible, well balanced, and they're dexterous, got good digital manipulation skills. And how are they able to do this? In part, it's because they're able to train themselves in virtual worlds. In other words, they're not just training in the real physical world, which is slow and takes time. They're able to, as it were, imagine in these virtual worlds what to do. And as they eventually figure out how to do things correctly in the virtual world, then they're able to apply the same methods in the real world. And that's only possible if the virtual world is a sufficiently good model of the real world. And up till now, it hasn't been great. But in the last 3 to 5 years, it's got a lot better, which is why robots are suddenly much more capable than before. They don't fall over to the same extent. They still do sometimes. They're not quite perfect yet, but that is progressing very quickly as well.
So for those of you that don't know what we do here at ITA, so we are a financial transformation consultancy that specialises in Sage technologies, whether that is looking at a new solution, evaluating your current solution, or just helping you to get the most out of your current setup, we can help. But rather than me tell you all the reasons that you should consider working with us as a Sage partner or a transformation consultancy partner, I'm going to let our customers do the talking for us.
ITAS were there from the sort of get-go, helping us, talking through what the process was going to involve, setting expectations, making it clear that how much work we were going to have to put in to make sure that the project was a success at the end. And then talking us through all our different options, looking through our current processes, making us reevaluate what was important, which elements we wanted to move across to the new system, how we wanted to configure our new system, and also kind of making us sit back and really think about what is the success of this project. When we get to the other end, when we finish the implementation and we're in the system, what's success going to look like? And actually, putting that question back to us and really making us sit down and think about what is it that we are looking to gain from this whole process was really useful internally, making us really think about the key objectives and which areas to maybe prioritize over others. It was also really helpful sitting down and thinking about it rather than one big, huge project, actually splitting it down into different phases, sort of smaller bite-sized chunks, which made it seem a little bit more achievable within the time. And then thankfully, ITAS have been super flexible with us during this process because it happened to coincide our implementation with our first ever financial audit, which just took up huge amounts of our time that we didn't expect. So we did have to slightly push back some of our go live dates, and thankfully ITAS were accommodating and actually helped us navigate through that process. And like to say that thankfully we're out the other side of our first phase of go live, and loving the move to intact.
So given the progress, because some of this, and I think when you think back on the books you read, certainly when I was younger, about what the future could look like, science fiction, a lot of this feels like science fiction is becoming fantasy, or the other way around, I should say, becoming reality. How real is this, this piece in terms of how likely is that this is going to happen in the next 3 to 5 years?
Well, that is the most important question, frankly. And just because something is written about in science fiction doesn't mean it'll never come to pass. Many things were anticipated in science fiction and did come to pass, sometimes a lot more quickly. When I was young, there were Star Treks, and they had communicators in, was it the 23rd century? And, well, smartphones came along, partly due to what myself and some colleagues did in companies. They came along a lot more quickly than the 23rd century. We don't have beam me up, Scotty. We don't yet have the tricorder, something you can wave in front of somebody and find out exactly what's making them ill. But there is a lot of science fiction that has become reality. And by the way, there is a tricorder prize, which is run by the X Prize Foundation. You don't need to do everything that the Doctor in Star Trek was able to do with his tricorder, but you can pick up a lot of signals more quickly. So just because something's in science fiction doesn't mean it should be dismissed. So who can you trust? And it's not easy. There are lots of talking heads. People won't know me. They shouldn't just trust what I'm saying. You got to figure out who you can trust and who you can rely on. And I come back to this. This is one of the most important skills, figuring out the right partners. And you can't do this by yourself either. It's joining communities, I guess, like the community of people who pay attention to the CFO 4.0. That's a good start. I encourage people to tap into what we're doing at London Futurists. I encourage people to find out others. And it is hard to discover who is just making things up, who is over-exaggerating. So it's worth, therefore, reading various books. And I won't mention my own books here, but there are books by people like Darren McKee, which I I think it's called Super Intelligence. I may not have remembered that correctly, but Darren McKee is definitely his name. I think that's one of the most accessible books for a general audience as to why this should be taken seriously. Now, it's not just a matter of, gosh, this is going to put us out of work. It's also a matter of this is going to provide an abundance of low-cost goods for us, maybe even free goods, because the better the AIs and robots get at creating things, manufacturing things, we will have the equivalent of the best ever tutors, personal tutors, at our beck and call all day long. So people already learning much more quickly than they ever did before. So part of my answer is, well, how can you figure out what's true and what's not true? Is you've got to get good at asking some of the online tutors, online communities, giving more reason to reach various conclusions.
And I think that's one of the pieces that obviously being in the tech world, there can often be a like you say, that hype. What sorts of questions would you ask to understand whether something that somebody is saying is hype versus has the potential to be reality? How do we get good at what you said was the key skill about understanding who to trust and what to, and how to figure out whether what somebody's saying is correct?
So, first of all, you can look at their track record. What did they actually write in the past? How confident did they express it? Because there's no crime to be wrong with a forecast, so long as you've expressed it with an appropriate probability, with appropriate hedging. So you might say this could happen, but it's going to require this and this to happen. And if this doesn't happen, this outcome won't come. So there's a track record. There's also, are they talking in absolutes or are they talking in statistical probabilities? Next, there's the point is, well, if you ask them questions, are they open to looking at alternatives? Because that's what a scientific mechanism is. It's not just, I've got my one dogma, I've got my one message, and I'm going to keep on repeating it. It's, well, can we look at alternatives? Maybe it's not going to turn out like this because X, Y, Z. Can they engage, therefore, in a meaningful conversation rather than just being a one-track pony? So there's two things to help with.
And you mentioned, obviously, that prompt engineering was all of the rage and the thing that everyone was saying you should learn. If you had to give advice to an individual or maybe some school leavers right now about what skills they should be developing in order to maximize their chance of employment in the future, what would it be?
I have quite a long answer to this, so I'll try and break it down because it's a question I get asked all the time when people listen to me and they start to see, gosh, maybe this level of change will happen. So I often get asked this, and I've developed a number of answers over the years. The first, perhaps the most important skill, is to be faster at learning, because whatever you've learned in the past, there's probably going to be new things you're going to need to pick up more quickly. You might have become an expert in Mid-Journey as one of the image generation tools, and then suddenly there's a better tool that everybody's using and it works in a different way. So you're going to have to be able to learn that more quickly. And key to fast learning, a skill sometimes called learning how to learn, key to it is two sub-skills. One is unlearning, it means giving up on some knowledge which once upon a time was important to us. We learned it the hard way. This is how I do things. And maybe we've got to be able to say, well, this used to be the case, but frankly, now it's no longer. And alongside that, there's how do we learn? Well, we can learn by using AI to help us to learn. So how do you learn how to use this new image generation tool in this hypothetical example of something better than Midjourney? Well, you can ask online. You can ask AIs online. You can figure out which YouTube channels are the most reliable. And related to that, there's the skill which I've already mentioned several times. I put it on the highest level as well. That's the skill of collaboration, which means picking the partners you can work with and sometimes unselecting partners that have been useful in the past but are no longer moving quickly enough. Also picking the communities to be part of and sometimes picking the communities to leave because once again, they are stuck in a slightly previous version of the future rather than the latest insights. So that's two.
And so if we think about, I guess, what the world will look like in 5 or 10 years, if AI is doing, like, let's say, the majority of the jobs, what does that mean for humankind?
It could be very good or it could be very bad. That's important. That's part of what I call the big picture. And one of the 7 skills I have in mind is understand the big picture, understand what you know about the big picture, understand what you don't know about the big picture so you can learn more. So part of the big picture is that there could be a world of, let's call it abundance or even superabundance, a sustainable superabundance ahead in which we don't need to work because the AIs are doing lots of things for us. They're generating clean energy. They've figured out how to get nuclear fusion working, perhaps, or how to capture lots of light from satellites in space and beam it as energy to the ground, or some other new energy approach. So the AIs are generating clean energy, nutritious food, ample education, which we touched on, wonderful healthcare for all. It's creating safe material goods. It's accelerating recycling. So we're cleaning up the planet, cleaning up the environment. That's all possible if we steer the development and use of AI wisely. On the other hand, there are many bad scenarios too, and we have to take them seriously as well. And that's because we humans sometimes do bad things to each other. We go to war with each other. We spy on each other. We deceive each other to try and get more power. We try and get the political power. We try to get commercial power. And if you give such humans more powerful technologies, they can mess up our minds. They can mess up the planet. They can go to war with each other in very nasty ways. It won't necessarily be AIs against the humans, as in Terminator. It may be some group of humans are using AIs to make them more deadly. Maybe they are terrorists. There are sadly some terrorists in the world who, for whatever reason, want to cause chaos and mayhem. Sometimes it's just an individual person who gets depressed, or sometimes it's a group of people who feel that they need to fight against the elites or fight against the people who are doing well in society, fight against the cosmopolitans or whoever, fight against the immigrants, fight against the nasty politicians who let too many immigrants into their country. And most people who are in such a mood don't do anything terrible as a result, but a small number do. Some of them drive their cars into crowds of people. Some of them go on shooting rampages. Just imagine what they might do with access to AI that tells them not just how to make safe new drugs, but if you program the AI in the opposite way, it can come up with potions for dreadful poisons. So this is quite a serious topic. But this is a possibility that lies ahead, which is why some of the world's leading politicians have been going to various meetings in which they've said, how can we govern more wisely? How can we coordinate our approaches to making sure that AI delivers this beneficial outcome rather than a catastrophic outcome? And there are 2 other acronyms I might introduce now. I've already had AGI for artificial general intelligence. Well, there's BGI and CGI. BGI means a beneficial general intelligence, which is what ideally we want, the thing that will lead to abundance and lots of benevolent results, lead to much greater human well-being than ever before. But the CGI, as you might guess, stands for catastrophic general intelligence which is misused by angry, alienated, frustrated humans, or misused by naive, over-optimistic, reckless people, and there are plenty of them, dare I say it, in the tech industry, or AIs that simply are beyond our understanding. And this is a problem which we've touched on a few times already, that people don't always understand the processes AIs are using, never quite sure if you can rely on individual results that are come up with. And these AIs that are beyond our understanding, beyond our control, they may behave a bit like some malware. And many of the worst kinds of malware did more terrible things than the person who released the malware expected, because it turns out they were just more virulent and harder to control. So somebody might release an AI to try and have a bit of mischief, to try and make themselves some money, to try and put their stamp of notoriety in the world, and it may do worse things. So we needed to see these two possibilities ahead. We need to get that big picture, and we need to coordinate activities to ensure that we aren't developing AI in a reckless, thoughtless, unsafe way, in which there's a race in which companies are willing to cut quality corners to try and get out first to the market, but instead that we agree various principles that AI should not do such and such. We should not be releasing AIs that are good in deceiving us, for example. We should not be releasing AIs that make copies of themselves and hide copies away, which already some of the most recent AIs have been detected at trying to do during various training runs. So these things need to be stopped, and they're not going to be stopped by individual action. They're going to need coordinated action, which means everybody listening to this podcast might wonder, should they be talking to their MPs more about this? Or should they be talking to other leaders of society who have some influence? If we get it right, it's a wonderful future. Absolutely incredible. If we get it wrong, there may not be podcasts 5 years from now, because we might be in a new dark age or worse.
And I think that's a really interesting concept in terms of what can we as individuals, do, and what should we as business leaders be collectively trying to do to create that world of abundance and that benefits humankind versus detracts from it. So if you had to say to our listeners, what should people be doing or thinking about now so that we're all moving towards that more positive future, what would it be?
Well, first of all, people need to educate themselves, as I've mentioned. There are books to read, there are podcasts to subscribe to, there are good YouTube channels which people should track down. But then there's coordinating and partnering. And coordination has often resulted in progress in business and products. If you leave people just to have a reckless race, you end up with much poorer results than if people can coordinate. So let's look back at history from the UK, when once upon a time it was quite common to send young children to work in factories. Why? Because young children had nimble, small fingers. They could fit in spaces in between the machines that human adults couldn't fit in. And most of the factory owners were uncomfortable with this because they had their conscience twinging and said, this is a terrible life for children, especially when many of them got injured as a result. And some of them thought it'd be far better if we didn't do this, but they were alarmed and concerned that if they stopped employing children themselves, they would lose out to more rapacious competitors. So that's why some of them came together and got Parliament to pass laws in stages which required that particularly young children should not be in such places, that children should be educated. So they passed the laws, and very importantly, they also mandated that there should be factory inspectors to check that people were actually complying. So that's a simple example of how it's better sometimes for companies to coordinate rather than just have the individual racing. But that coordination sometimes works by companies simply forming together into their own coalitions, into their own industry groupings, when they say, here are the standards we should all adhere to, and if you fail to adhere to it, you're going to get a bad reputation and nobody should do business with you. Sometimes that's sufficient, but I think these industry bodies also need to ask for help from governments. And Rishi Sunak, how many prime ministers ago was he? Probably just one prime minister ago in the UK. It's easy to lose count. He actually said something quite profound. He said that we should not be trusting the AI companies to mark their own homework. Just as you don't trust students always just to mark their own homework and give themselves A grades, you get other people to come in and mark it. And he was worried that if you just trust companies to say, don't worry, we've tested this software, we've checked for bad outcomes, and trust us, it's good. You need independent bodies to do that as well. Some of them have lost the power that they had even just 1 year ago, but some of them have been renamed as AI security institutes, which seems to be a politically more acceptable word, because regardless of your politics, security is important for everybody, whereas some people shrug off the term safety and say, oh, woke, we don't care about safety here. They don't quite say it quite as bluntly as that, but that's the undercurrent. So anyway, these bodies do exist, and it's important they get strengthened, and it's important that big tech is held accountable. Just as we don't trust big oil to always report honestly about their carbon emissions, just as we don't trust big tobacco to report honestly on links between smoking and cancer, we should not trust any industry. We should not trust big tech just to always say, don't worry, this is safe. We know best.
And you mentioned, obviously, it's important that we all start to educate ourselves. Could you give us, your top 5 recommendations of resources? And I'm going to go first and say, obviously, the London Futurists podcast is one you should be listening to, and we'll make sure that everyone has links in. But what other resources would you recommend and suggest that people start paying attention to? What communities would you suggest they be part of?
Well, there are several good books. There is a book by Darren McKee that I mentioned. There's a slightly harder book, but it's absolutely fascinating. It's by Mustafa Suleyman, who used to be the co-founder at DeepMind, along with Demis Hassabis and Shane Legg. He is the one who arguably has the most liberal arts backing of the 3. So the other 2 studied AI or neuroscience. He has a background in broader understanding history. His book's called The Coming Wave, and it has a very broad understanding of the particular challenges, not only of AI, but of coordinating responses. So that's another book that is well worth reading. There's a book by a British-based journalist called Parme Olson, which is called Supremacy, and it shows in a very accessible way the backgrounds of 2 of the most important people in the AI industry. That's Sam Altman, the founder of OpenAI, who created ChatGPT, amongst others, and Demis Hassabis, who is the principal founder of DeepMind. Both of them were child geniuses. Both of them have got a fascinating prehistory. The book tells the story sympathetically, but also shows that how in each case commercial realities are driving them to do things which probably in their original intention they would not do in terms of risking the future. So that gives a very human story as well. So that's 3 things worth checking out. That's a good start.
Fantastic. And for all of those listening, don't worry, we will put the links to all of those resources to help you on starting your AI journey. And I want to say a massive thank you, David, for all of your advice and insight into the world of AI. If you had to give the CFOs and finance leaders listening right now some advice on how to deal with the volatility that all of this is going to bring, what would your top tips be?
One thing we haven't touched on yet, which does deserve attention, is emotional intelligence. These things are frightening. These things are scary, potentially exciting, but we shouldn't just allow ourselves to be governed by strong feelings of yuck or strong feelings of wow. We need to have an emotional resilience. There's going to be many mistakes when you start using AI, and you need to have the emotional intelligence, not just to shout and complain when mistakes happen. By the nature of delving into an unknown field, there will be lots of learnings along the way, which involve sometimes embarrassing situations. So emotional intelligence has always been important in businesses, but I would say it's even more important than before. And there are lots of resources, of course, on emotional intelligence. It's not just about managing and recognizing your own emotions. That's important, certainly. It's also managing and supporting the emotions of others. And by the way, AI can even help with this too. Some people have found it surprisingly useful as a personal coach. It's not yet at the time when it's watching us continually. I think that's coming soon, however, when people will have a coach at the end of the day saying, David, when you were on that show, you talked too much about this and you didn't say enough about that. And by the way, you didn't smile enough. And by the way, X, Y, Z. And it'll tell me in exactly the right way that I will be able to act on. and it will also tell me lots of other things. Now, it doesn't quite do that yet, but there are systems, as I say, where you can actually talk to it, not just about your rational queries. Tell me, is there a tool that will do such and such? You can also say, well, here's what's frustrating me. Here's what's frightening me. Here's what's exciting me. And it might actually offer some useful advice. So emotional intelligence. The second one is agility. Now, agility is a buzzword, but I'm a big fan of agility helping in the real world. Agility means that when there's something big and daunting, you don't try and swallow it whole. Maybe you need to look at it whole. That's understanding the big picture. But how do you tackle it? You've got to be able to carve off a small chunk. You don't bet your whole company. You don't bet the whole farm on one experiment. You try it in a short, speedy, time-boxed way with a group. And then as a result of that, you monitor what happened and you are prepared to change. So that's agility. And some people say agility is just a buzzword, but I disagree. So that kind of fluid intelligence is very much necessary as a complement to the other intelligences and other skills that CFOs and others have traditionally understood and valued.
Amazing. Well, David, this has been genuinely fascinating, and I hope I will be able to convince you to come back on to talk about even more of the future with AI. But before I do, if you want to learn more about yourself, or about what you're doing at London Futurists, where can they find you, and how's the best place to learn more?
So London Futurists has its own website, londonfuturist.com. Our meetings are advertised on a link from there. That's a meetup, meetup.com. Can't remember the exact URL, but it's if you Google Meetup London Futurists, you'll find it. We have some online meetings and we have some meetings in the pub. Anybody within shouting distance of Fleet Street. We meet roughly once every 6 weeks or so for a real world get together there. I write a lot too. I write on my own personal blog. That's dw2blog.com. And I write in various other places too, but I typically provide links to them all on social media. I'm still on X, formerly known as Twitter. I haven't given up on that yet because I do judge that I'm smarter as a result of interacting with what's said there, provided I'm sufficiently emotionally intelligent not to let some of the vile stuff there sweep over me. So you can find me on X as simply DW2. That's 2 the digit. Or if you don't like X, you can find me on most of the other social media as well.
That's fantastic. Well, and as always, guys, if you are listening to this and you want those links, please check out the show notes. We'll make it nice and simple for you to find them all. So big thank you, David, for sharing and not just your knowledge, but your views on the future. And thank you for giving us that insight into what life could look like with AI in the future. So thank you.
It's my pleasure. And it's not just important whether what I say is going to come to pass. That's not what I care about. What I care about is people taking action here and now to help them cope better with the changes ahead and indeed to thrive on the changes ahead.
Absolutely. And some great advice for how we can start taking that action and starting to learn more about what action we need to take. So thank you, David, and thank you to our listeners. So AI is obviously a rapidly changing topic area. There is so much happening, and as David said earlier, it is accelerating. So if you have some questions or some scenarios that you want us to pick out, then please do reach out to me. DM me on LinkedIn or reach me on the podcast email on our website, www.itassolutions.co.uk. Thank you to David and thank you to our listeners. And if you've enjoyed this podcast, please do not forget to leave us a review. That just helps us get noticed. So we'll see you next time on the CFO 4.0 podcast.
Hey Google, what's the best accounting software for my business? Give it a couple of years, and I bet you she'll be able to answer you pretty accurately. But for now, it's still one of the few questions Google can't give you an answer for. But we can. Take our free quiz and find out which Sage product is the right fit for your business. Just head to itassolutions.co.uk.